The dream always started the same way. February 26, 1991. Iraqi desert stretching infinite under a sky choked with smoke from burning oil wells. Marcus Reed, 28 years old and carrying 40 pounds of medical gear, ran through sand that grabbed at his boots like wet concrete. Ahead, a Bradley fighting vehicle sat motionless, black smoke pouring from its turret. The RPG had punched through the right side, and Marcus could hear screaming, even over the thunder of tank cannons somewhere to his left. Danny Cole's voice cut through the chaos, thin and desperate. "Reed, can't feel my legs. Get me out." Marcus reached the Bradley hands, already moving to the hatch release. Metal seared his palms through his gloves. The heat was incredible, the kind that made air shimmer and lungs burn. He got the hatch open 6 inches before the mechanism jammed. Danny's face appeared in the gap, smeared with blood and soot, eyes wide with the particular terror of a man who knew he was about to die. "I'm here. Hold on." Marcus wedged a pry bar into the gap, throwing his weight against it. The metal groaned but didn't move. 30 seconds. That's how long he had before the ammunition cooked off. He knew it. Danny knew it. Everyone knew it. Hands grabbed Marcus from behind, his squad leader, Sergeant First Class Martinez, shouting in his ear, "Reed, fall back. It's gone." Marcus fought him, actually threw an elbow that connected with Martinez's jaw. "I can get him. I can." The explosion lifted Marcus off his feet and threw him 15 feet backward. When his ears stopped ringing and his vision cleared, the Bradley was an inferno. Danny Cole was gone. Marcus jerked awake in his quarters aboard Sentinel-7, hard hammering, skin slick with sweat, despite the broken air conditioning that had turned his room into a convection oven. 37 years since Desert Storm. 40 years since he'd held Danny's dog tag and promised himself he'd never hesitate again, never let protocol kill another person he could save. The promise hadn't helped. Nothing helped. The guilt was a constant weight, heavy as body armor and just as confining. He reached for the nightstand, fingers finding the familiar shape of Danny's challenge coin from the 82nd Airborne, rubbed his thumb over the raised eagle, whispered the same words he'd whispered every morning since 1991. "I'm sorry, brother." The temperature in his quarters read 38 degrees Celsius. Station engineering had been promising to fix his air conditioning for 3 days, but repairs to the docking bay took priority. So Marcus did what any reasonable 68-year-old maintenance technician did when living in a metal box floating in space, where even breathing recycled someone else's exhalation. He slept without clothes and tried not to move too much. He just closed his eyes when the cold hit him. Not cold like broken air conditioning. Cold like something living, something desperate, pressing against his bare chest with the weight of a human body, but the temperature of deep space. Marcus's combat reflexes, 40 years dormant, but never truly gone, snapped him awake. His hand moved toward the emergency button on the wall panel, even as his eyes tried to make sense of what he was seeing in the dim red glow of the emergency lights that had started flashing in the corridor outside. A woman lay on top of him. At least his brain insisted it was a woman, though nothing about her matched any definition of human. Her skin was the color of obsidian, smooth and reflective like polished stone, and it seemed to shift through deeper shades of black as the emergency lights pulsed. She was thin in a way that suggested not starvation, but a fundamentally different structure. Long limbs that bent at angles that made his eyes hurt. Fingers that had too many joints. A torso that was more cylindrical than curved. Her head was oval, hairless, and where her eyes should have been, 3 dark spots arranged in a perfect triangle tracked him with an intelligence that made his chest tighten. She was shivering. Or something like shivering. Her whole body trembled with small, violent movements that reminded Marcus of the hypothermic villagers he treated during night operations in Iraq when desert temperatures plunged and people died because they didn't understand how fast cold could kill. His hand had stopped halfway to the emergency button. His medic brain, the part that had kept him alive through 2 wars and 50 years of trying to outrun his failures, took over with the cold assessment that had once saved lives. Hypothermia, severe. Skin temperature, maybe 20 degrees Celsius based on the cold radiating from her. Breathing shallow, wait, was she breathing? Hard to tell with that physiology. Pulse impossible to locate without knowing her anatomy. 2 minutes, maybe less. She'd come to him because his room was the warmest section of the station, the broken air conditioning turning his quarters into an accidental sanctuary. The flashback hit him with the force of physical impact. Iraqi village night, 2004. A child, maybe 6 years old, pulled from a collapsed building after a firefight. Hypothermic from shock and the brutal temperature drop that came with desert darkness. Marcus had stripped off his jacket, wrapped the kid against his chest, shared body heat for 20 minutes while waiting for evac. The child had lived. Same principle. Different species. Didn't matter. Marcus pulled his thermal blanket down over both of them, military grade designed to trap every calorie of body heat. He adjusted position, giving her more surface contact, letting his own elevated temperature 37 degrees Celsius higher than the ambient air transfer through skin contact. Basic thermodynamics. Heat flows from hot to cold. He was hot. She was dying of cold. Simple math. Her shivering began to ease just slightly. The desperate sound she'd been making, a vibration that seemed to come from inside her body rather than a mouth. A frequency he felt in his bones more than heard, quieted to something less urgent. Marcus kept his breathing steady, controlled. Talked to her the way he'd talked to wounded soldiers who didn't speak English, casualties, who just needed to hear a human voice saying, "You're gonna be okay," in a tone that meant it. "Easy, I've got you, you're safe here." The door to his quarters exploded inward with a bang that made decades-old combat instincts flood his system with adrenaline. 3 security officers in tactical gear rushed through weapon lights, cutting harsh white beams through the red emergency glow. Behind them came Lieutenant Ray Booker, the station's head of security, a man 10 years Marcus's junior, who carried himself like someone who'd never seen actual combat and compensated by being aggressive in situations that didn't require it. Booker's weapon came up centered on the alien woman. "Hostile aliens, step away, Reed." Now, Marcus didn't move. Held his hand up in a gesture that was both compliance and command, something he'd learned from sergeants who knew how to control a situation without escalating it. "Belay that order, Lieutenant. She's a casualty, not a combatant." Booker's face flushed red even in the emergency lighting. "That thing crashed into our docking bay, could have killed 50 people, Then we assessed the situation." Marcus let his voice drop into what the 82nd Airborne had called command voice, the tone that cut through chaos and made people listen whether they wanted to or not. "I'm not executing wounded on my watch. Get Dr. Kim, now." Captain Elena Torres appeared in the doorway, a lean woman in her 50s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent 20 years flying attack helicopters before taking command of a research station. She took in the scene with a fighter pilot's quick assessment, the alien Marcus, the security team with weapons raised, and made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Stand down, Reed. What's her status?" Marcus kept his hand on the alien woman's shoulder, feeling the way her body temperature was slowly, infinitesimally beginning to rise. "Critical hypothermia, needs immediate medical intervention, ma'am." Torres pulled her comm unit. "Dr. Kim to Reed's quarters. Medical emergency. Move it." She looked back at Booker. "Lieutenant, secure the corridor. Nobody else comes through that door unless they're medical." Booker lowered his weapon but didn't holster it. "Captain, that thing's ship tore through our hull. We've got 3 sections exposed to vacuum, half our systems fried from some kind of electromagnetic pulse. We're running on backup power." The words hit Marcus like a gut punch. Backup power meant 48 hours before critical systems started failing. Life support would hold, but only if nothing else went wrong. And something had definitely gone wrong. The alien woman's ship hadn't just crashed, it had done catastrophic damage. His decision not to hit the emergency button might have just killed everyone on the station. But when he looked at the woman in his arms still trembling, despite the thermal blanket and his body heat, he couldn't make himself regret the choice. She was dying. He'd let Danny die because he'd hesitated, waited for orders, followed protocol. Not again. Never again, Doctor. Sarah Kim pushed through the security cordon medical bag, already open, scanner in hand. She was a small woman with quick movements and the kind of focused intensity that made people instinctively move out of her way. She took one look at the alien, at Marcus, and her professional assessment overrode everything else. "Everyone out except Reed. I need to examine her." Booker started to object. Kim didn't wait to hear it. "Out now, or I'll have you removed for interfering with emergency medical treatment." The security team backed out. Booker lingered at the door, one hand still on his weapon, but Torres pulled him into the corridor. The door sealed, though Marcus was certain they were watching through the security cameras. Fine. Let them watch. He had work to do. Kim ran her scanner over the alien woman's body, the device beeping and flashing with data that Marcus couldn't interpret from his position. Kim's face showed nothing but concentration, the way good doctors looked when the situation was bad, but not yet lost. Silicon-based life form. Kim's voice was steady, clinical. Completely different biochemistry from anything we've encountered. Her body temperature is dangerously low, measuring 22 degrees Celsius. Based on thermal regulation patterns I'm seeing, she should be running at least 40 degrees to maintain metabolic function. Marcus kept his arms around the alien woman, sharing heat. Can you save her? Kim sat back, meeting his eyes. For the first time since entering the room, she let emotion show a mixture of wonder and worry that made her look younger than her 38 years. I don't know. I've never treated a silicon-based life form. Nobody has. But if heat is what she needs... She gestured at Marcus at the way the alien woman was pressed against him. You're keeping her alive right now. Her thermal signature is stabilizing where your skin makes contact. The alien woman made that sound again, the vibration from inside her body. Different this time, less desperate, more purposeful. She lifted one long arm, fingers that bent at too many joints, reaching toward Marcus with what looked like deliberate intent. Kim tensed. Reed, we don't know if there's contamination risk. But Marcus was already reaching back. Something in that gesture, in the way those three dark spots that might have been eyes focused on him with absolute attention, told him this was communication. This was important. His fingers touched hers and the world turned to heat. Not burning heat, information heat. Waves of thermal energy that carried meaning, that flooded his mind with images and sensations that weren't his own. He gasped, tried to pull back, but the connection held him locked in place while his consciousness filled with visions that couldn't be real but felt more real than anything he'd experienced in 40 years. A star, massive and red, swelling larger and larger until it filled the sky of a world covered in crystalline cities that caught and refracted light into patterns that hurt to look at. Terror and grief crashed through him. Not his emotions, but hers, shared through the thermal contact. He felt a civilization watching their sun die, felt the desperate scramble as millions tried to evacuate a planet that was burning from the inside out. Saw ships, hundreds of them, fleeing into the dark, while behind them, everything ended in fire and light. He saw the exodus, the cold of deep space, ships failing one by one as power systems died and heat bled into the void. Saw people, her people, crystallizing into beautiful statues as their body temperatures dropped below critical thresholds. Felt the desperation of a species facing extinction, scattered across the galaxy with nowhere to go and no one to help them. Then he felt hope, small and fragile but real. Hope because they had heard stories about humans, stories transmitted across light years picked up from Earth's own broadcasts. The Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969, Neil Armstrong's voice saying, "One small step for man." The Voyager Golden Record launched in 1907, carrying messages of peace and images of human diversity. Decades of radio signals that painted a picture of beings who adapted to anything, who survived impossible situations, who helped others even when it cost them everything. The images faded. Marcus pulled his hand back, breathing hard, his head spinning like he'd stood up too fast after lying down too long. His heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat that had nothing to do with the broken air conditioning ran down his spine. He looked at the alien woman with new understanding. Saw not a threat, but a leader who'd made the hardest choice any commander could make, sacrificing herself to save her people. Kim was staring at both of them, scanner forgotten in her hand. "Reed, what just happened?" Marcus's voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by emotions that weren't entirely his own. "She showed me. They communicate through thermal contact. Heat carries information for them." He swallowed, tried to organize thoughts that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her world died. Their star went red giant. Her whole species is running. She came here because they needed help. Kim's professionalism reasserted itself, but Marcus could see the wonder underneath. How many survivors? Marcus reached out, touched the alien woman's hand again, ready this time for the rush of heat and information. He saw the 12 ships approaching the station, felt the thousands of lives aboard them. Children and elders, scientists and farmers, soldiers and artists. A whole civilization reduced to 12 vessels and fading hope. Saw their power systems failing, heat, bleeding away, people dying in the cold dark, while their leader threw herself at the nearest human outpost in a desperate gamble that the stories were true. He pulled back. 12 ships, thousands of them. But they're in bad shape, running out of power, running out of heat. If we don't help them, they all die. Kim looked at her scanner at her patient at Marcus. We have to tell Torres. The intercom on the wall crackled to life before Marcus could respond. Bora, the station's communications officer, her voice carrying the kind of stress that came from watching too many problems appear on screens at once. Captain Torres, we have multiple contacts on approach vector. 12 vessels configuration unknown. They'll be in docking range in 20 minutes. Torres' voice came back immediately tight with command authority. All hands yellow alert. Read Kim, whatever you're learning in there, I need it now. Marcus stood pulling the thermal blanket tighter around the alien woman. His legs protested retired, and he'd been lying still too long, but he pushed through it. Captain requesting permission to bring her to the command center. Pause, then. Granted, but read if she makes one wrong move. She won't, ma'am. Marcus looked down at the alien woman at those 3 dark spots tracking his face. She's not here to hurt us. She's here because her people are dying, and we're their last hope. Getting the alien woman to the command center took longer than Marcus wanted. Her body temperature had stabilized at 35 degrees, still low but no longer immediately life-threatening. She could stand with support, though her long legs didn't quite work the way human legs did, and she kept needing to pause and orient herself. Marcus stayed close, one hand on her shoulder, maintaining thermal contact. Every time he let go, for more than a few seconds, her body temperature started dropping, and that desperate vibration sound returned. Kim walked on the other side medical scanner, tracking vitals that made no sense by human standards, but showed clear patterns of improvement. Her metabolism is fascinating. She's converting thermal energy directly into biological function. No digestive system as we'd recognize it. She literally lives on heat. They passed crew members in the corridors, people who stopped and stared with expressions ranging from curiosity to fear. Marcus met their eyes with the same steady look he'd given young soldiers before combat operations. Calm, certain, radiating the confidence that said, this situation is under control, even if it looks insane. The command center occupied the upper hub of Sentinel-7, a circular room dominated by displays showing station status, sensor feeds, and the vast darkness of space beyond their hull. 12 ships showed on the long-range display, each one broadcasting the kind of power signatures that suggested they were running on fumes and prayers. Torres stood at the central console, flanked by Booker and Wilson Will Carter, the station's chief engineer. Carter was a large man in his 40s who approached every problem with the enthusiasm of someone who saw the universe as an endless series of puzzles to solve. Right now, he was studying the approaching ships with the kind of focus that meant he was already 3 steps ahead in figuring out how to help them. Torres turned when Marcus entered with the alien woman. Her expression flickered surprise, assessment, decision, then settled into command mode. Dr. Kim's status, Kim gestured with her scanner. Stable for now, but only because Reed's maintaining the thermal contact. Her species needs sustained temperatures of at least 40 degrees Celsius to function normally. Anything below 30 and they start shutting down. Torres looked at the alien woman, really looked with the same assessment she'd given enemy aircraft before deciding whether to engage or evade. What she saw must have satisfied some internal calculation because she nodded once. Reed, can she communicate? Marcus touched the alien woman's hand. The thermal rush was becoming familiar now, though no less strange. He felt her question, felt himself forming the answer, felt the flow of information moving both ways through the contact. When he spoke, the words felt like translation from a language he didn't quite know. Her name is Sarah. She's their queen. The 12 ships carry about 8,000 survivors. Their star went red giant 6 months ago. They've been running ever since, burning through power reserves, watching people die from the cold. They picked up our broadcasts over the years, the Apollo missions, Voyager, decades of transmissions. They believe humans will help. Booker made a disgusted sound. And we're just supposed to take her word for it. That could all be psychological warfare. Make us feel sorry for them while they, what, Lieutenant? Marcus didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made Booker stop mid-sentence. While 8,000 dying refugees attack a research station with weapons they don't have and energy they have already burned through. He touched Sarah's hand again, pulling up the memories she'd shared of their dying world. Captain requests permission to share thermal contact with you. You need to see what I've seen. Torres considered that for maybe 3 seconds, made her decision with the same speed she'd probably made the decision to fire missiles at targets a decade ago. She crossed the command center, held out her hand. Marcus placed it against Sarah's palm. Torres's whole body went rigid, her eyes widened. For 20 seconds, she stood absolutely still, while the thermal information flooded through her images of a civilization ending a desperate flight of hope placed in the hands of strangers who might not care. When she pulled back, her hand was shaking slightly. She controlled it with visible effort. Jesus Christ. Torres's voice came out quiet, shaken in a way that combat pilots weren't supposed to sound. She looked at Marcus, at Sarah, at the ships on the display. They really did come here for help. The communication console beeped. Earth Command's official seal appeared on screen, accompanied by General Patricia Hawkins' voice. Hawkins ran U.S. Space Command from an office in Colorado, thousands of miles and a whole world away from the decisions being made on Sentinel-7. Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone who expected immediate obedience. Sentinel-7, this is General Hawkins. You are ordered to maintain defensive posture and refuse docking to all alien vessels. Quarantine protocols are in effect. Any vessel attempting unauthorized boarding will be met with lethal force. Acknowledge. Torres looked at the screen, at Sarah, at Marcus, at the 12 dying ships on her display. Then she reached out and muted the communication channel. Captain Booker started, I didn't copy that last transmission. Torres's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who just made a decision that would either save thousands of lives or end her career, probably both. Station communications must be experiencing interference from the damage. We'll have to troubleshoot that later. Right now, we have 8,000 beings who need immediate assistance. She turned to the crew. Every face in the command center was watching her, waiting to see what she'd do, waiting to see if she'd follow orders or follow her conscience. I need to know where everyone stands. What I'm about to do violates direct orders from Earth Command. Anyone who wants to distance themselves from this decision, file a formal objection now. No judgment, no hard feelings. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out for 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. Then Will Carter cleared his throat. My parents were refugees from Nigeria. Came to the States with nothing, running from a civil war. Other people helped them when they didn't have to. This feels like paying that forward, ma'am. Sir Kim nodded. Hippocratic oath doesn't specify species. I became a doctor to save lives. More lives. Booker shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Marcus could see the internal war playing out across the younger man's face, duty versus conscience, orders versus morality. Finally, he spoke, words coming out reluctant but genuine. I still think they could be dangerous. That electromagnetic pulse could have killed us all. But, he looked at Sarah, really looked, maybe for the first time. A threat would have finished the job. She had the power to destroy us, but controlled it instead. That takes discipline. Morality. I can't execute people with that kind of control. Torres waited another few seconds, giving anyone else a chance to object. When no one did, she unmuted the communication channel. General Hawkins, Sentinel-7 copies your last. Please be advised we are experiencing communications difficulties due to damage from the collision. We are initiating emergency rescue operations for distressed vessels. We'll update you as situation develops. Sentinel-7 out. She cut the channel before Hawkins could respond. Looked at Marcus. You're our only communication link with them. I need you to coordinate the rescue. Can you do that? Marcus touched Sarah's hand, felt her desperate hope mixed with exhaustion and pain, felt 8,000 lives hanging on the decisions being made in the next few minutes. Yes, ma'am. Then let's get to work. Torres turned to Will. Carter, I need you to convert our damaged sections into thermal habitats. Work with Sarah through Reed to get the specifications right. Will was already pulling up schematics on his display. How much time do I have? The first ship will be here in 15 minutes. Make it work. The next hour was controlled chaos. Marcus stood at the communications console with Sarah beside him, one hand maintaining constant thermal contact while she guided him through the technical specifications her people needed. Will and his engineering team tore through damaged sections, rerouting power, installing thermal management systems cobbled together from station equipment and materials salvaged from Sarah's crashed ship. The work was desperate, improvised, and probably violated a dozen safety protocols. It was also the only chance 8,000 people had of surviving the next 24 hours. The first ship docked at the 18-minute mark. Torres had cleared the largest airlock, set up a triage area, and assembled every crew member who could help. Marcus stood at the front with Sarah watching through the viewport as the alien ship maneuvered into position with the kind of flying that suggested their pilot was working on sheer determination and fading power. The airlock sealed, pressure equalized. The inner door opened and fog rolled out air so cold it condensed moisture from the station's atmosphere into visible clouds. Theran refugees stumbled through, and Marcus got his first real look at Sarah's people. They moved in ways that seemed wrong joints, bending at angles that made his eyes hurt, bodies swaying with a grace that belonged to deep-sea creatures or beings that had evolved in environments nothing like Earth. They were beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with human aesthetics, living sculptures in obsidian and onyx, reflecting emergency lights in patterns that shifted as they moved. Children came first, carried by adults whose thermal signatures showed them burning their own reserves to keep the young ones warm. Then the elderly, the injured, the ones who could barely move. Marcus watched a Theran child. At least he thought it was a child based on size and the way adults protected it stumble forward. Its body was flickering between solid black and translucent gray, the crystallization process that marked hypothermia in their species. The child reached toward him, and Marcus caught the universal meaning behind the gesture, even without thermal contact. Help. He moved forward without thinking, scooped the child up despite the cold that burned through his gloves, carried it to the nearest thermal chamber where Will had rigged heaters to maintain 45 degrees Celsius. The child's temperature started rising immediately, the crystallization reversing, body solidifying back into healthy obsidian. It made a sound, that internal vibration that felt like relief and gratitude and hope all wrapped together. Marcus went back for another, then another. The crew followed his lead, human and Theran working together in the desperate, focused way that emergency situations created. Language didn't matter. Species didn't matter. There were people dying and people trying to save them, and that was enough. By the time the 12th ship docked, Sentinel-7 had become something unprecedented, the first mixed human and alien community in history, held together by improvised thermal technology and the simple decision to help people who needed it. Marcus was carrying his 40th refugee to a thermal chamber when the alert came through. A new contact on long-range sensors, military configuration, fast approach, ETA 4 hours. Torres's voice came through station-wide comms, steady, but carrying an edge that made everyone stop and listen. All hands, we have an incoming destroyer. UES Protector, Admiral Victoria Cross commanding. Prepare for potential hostile contact. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He knew Cross had served under her during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, back when she'd been a major, and he'd been a master sergeant attached to her unit in Fallujah. She was brilliant, dedicated, and absolutely inflexible when it came to following orders. If she was coming here, she was coming to enforce Earth Command's directives by any means necessary. He looked at Sarah, at the Theran refugees being carried into thermal chambers, at the crew working to save them. Thought about Danny burning in that Bradley while Marcus waited for orders. Thought about the 40 years he'd spent wishing he could go back and make a different choice. Not this time. This time he'd act. Protocol could go to hell. But Marcus also felt something else through the thermal bond with Sarah. 8,000 people had just been saved from immediate death. Now came the harder part, keeping them alive while Earth's military decided whether refugees deserved sanctuary or imprisonment. In the thermal chamber closest to the command center, 16 Theran elders sat in a circle. Marcus noticed them because Sarah's thermal signature spiked with distress when she sensed their presence. He touched her hand, felt the rush of information, understood what was happening before anyone else did. The elders were dying, not from cold or injury or system failure. They were choosing to die, shutting down their thermal cores, deliberately sacrificing themselves to conserve resources for the younger generations. Marcus and Sarah rushed to Chamber C, found the circle of elders, their bodies already beginning to crystallize thermal signatures, fading with the kind of peaceful determination that came from a choice made with full understanding of its cost. The eldest Sarah showed him her name through thermal contact, matriarch Kess, the woman who'd taught Sarah how to lead, opened her three eyes when they entered. Her voice came not through sound, but through thermal vibration translated through Sarah to Marcus. We are old young queen. The young ones need heat we would consume. We choose the long sleep gladly. Sarah dropped to her knees, pressed both hands against Kess's cooling body. No, teacher, please, we have enough. You don't need to. Kess's hand touched Sarah's face with a gentleness that transcended species. We have seen our people reach safety. That is enough for any life. Her gaze shifted to Marcus. Guardian, you saved our queen. You brought us to sanctuary. Now teach her what we cannot. That leadership means knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Marcus knelt beside them, understanding through the thermal connection what Kess meant. Sarah had been holding on to her grief since her world died, freezing it solid to keep functioning. The elder's sacrifice was permission to feel again, to let the ice melt and process the loss. But that couldn't happen while she was still fighting for survival. He tried to warm Kess anyway, hands pressed against her crystallizing body. She stopped him with a touch colder than space. You already saved one queen today, Guardian. That is enough for any warrior. Let us rest. Marcus stayed there bearing witness as 16 elders chose the long sleep. Their bodies crystallized into statues of breathtaking beauty faces, peaceful hands linked in the circle they'd formed. A culture's wisdom and memory choosing to end so that young could survive. He pulled the challenge coin from his pocket, the one he'd carried since Danny died, and placed it at Matriarch Kess's crystallized feet. A token of respect from one warrior to another. Rest easy, ma'am. Your people are safe. Sra's grief poured through their thermal contact, 40 years of loss, finally demanding acknowledgement. Marcus held her while she processed what her people called the burning, when suppressed emotion came out as literal heat pouring from her body in waves that made the chamber's temperature spike dangerously. Kim came running with fire suppression equipment, but Marcus waved her off. She's not burning, she's grieving. Let her finish. The burning lasted 10 minutes. When it ended, Sarah was weak but clear-eyed. The emotional ice that had kept her functional finally melted and processed. She looked at the 16 crystallized elders, at the challenge coin Marcus had left, at the man who'd stayed with her through something her own people would have fled from. You understand sacrifice, she said through thermal contact. You carry dead friend's memory. You are still trying to save him. Every day, Marcus admitted, every single day. The alarm that interrupted them was the one they'd been dreading. Admiral Cross's destroyer had arrived. Admiral Victoria Cross stepped through the airlock with the kind of precision that suggested she'd calculated every movement before making it. She was 58 years old, lean and hard, like someone who'd spent 3 decades in military service and never learned how to relax. 2 decades flying combat missions, another 15 climbing the command structure, until she ran in operations for half the military assets in near-Earth space. Behind her came 20 Marines in full combat gear, weapons ready but not quite raised. A show of force that said, "We're here for compliance, not conversation." Marcus stood at the front of the reception area with Sarah beside him, one hand maintaining thermal contact. Behind them, 50 crew members, human and Theran, mixed together in a way that would have seemed impossible 6 hours ago. Waited in formation, not hostile, just present. Making it clear that if Cross wanted to take the Theran by force, she'd have to go through every person on this station. Cross's eyes swept the scene, missing nothing. Her gaze lingered on the Theran refugees on the thermal exchange suits that Will had jury-rigged to let both species share body heat comfortably, on the way humans and aliens stood together like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the beginning of doubt, before her expression locked back into command neutrality. Captain Torres stepped forward, military bearing matching Cross's intensity. Admiral, welcome to Sentinel-7. Cross didn't acknowledge the greeting, her attention fixed on Marcus with the kind of focus that he remembered from Fallujah, when she'd been evaluating battlefield situations and making decisions that meant life or death for everyone involved. Master Sergeant Reed, retired, 82nd Airborne Operation Iraqi Freedom. Her voice carried no warmth, just recognition. You were a damn good combat medic. Saved 18 men in my unit during the Fallujah assault. You should know better than this. Marcus met her eyes without flinching. 40 years of guilt had taught him how to stand his ground when he believed he was right. Ma'am, with respect, I know exactly what I'm doing. Cross's jaw tightened. You're harboring potential hostile aliens on a civilian research station. You've violated direct orders from Earth Command. You've endangered every person here and potentially Earth itself if these beings prove to be a threat. She gestured at the Theron. There's nothing to explain. You are hereby removed from any authority over this situation. All personnel will stand down immediately. The aliens will be transferred to military custody for quarantine and study. Dr. Kim stepped forward, medical scanner in hand. Admiral, these aren't hostiles. We've been living with them for 6 hours. We've learned to communicate. They're refugees, not threats. Cross's gaze shifted to Kim, cold as vacuum. And you must be the xenobiologist who made first contact. Dr. Kim, correct? She didn't wait for an answer. Your actions, while memorable, don't change the situation. These aliens are unknown, unvetted, and potentially dangerous. They will be quarantined until we determine they pose no threat to humanity. Marcus felt Sarah's hand tighten on his, felt the thermal pulse of fear and desperation. He'd promised her not in words but in actions that humans would help, that the stories her people had heard were true. He wasn't about to break that promise because someone in Colorado Springs thought protocols mattered more than lives. And if they died during quarantine, Marcus kept his voice level, reasonable. They need specific environmental conditions to survive. Temperatures above 40 Celsius silicon compound atmospheres. Will your military facility provide that? Or will you let 8,000 people die slowly while you study them? Cross's expression didn't change. We will do what is necessary to keep them alive for assessment. But the safety of humanity comes first. Always. The word assessment landed like a physical blow. Marcus had heard that word before in classified briefings about enemy combatants and enhanced interrogation. Assessment meant cages and experiments and the kind of treatment that turned living beings into specimens. He'd watched it happen to prisoners in Iraq, had filed reports that got ignored by people who thought ends justified means. He wouldn't watch it happen again. Torres took a step forward, positioning herself between Cross and the Theron. Admiral, I take full responsibility for the decision to provide aid. Court-martial me if you want. But these people, yes, people, have done nothing to warrant imprisonment. They're dying and we help them. That's not a crime. That's humanity at its best. Cross pulled a data pad from her belt, pulled up something that made the screen glow harsh white against the emergency lighting. Captain, I'm transmitting Earth Command's orders. Signed by General Hawkins and approved by the Security Council. She turned the pad so everyone could see the official seals, the authorization codes that meant this came from the top of the chain of command. All alien life forms are to be secured and transported to Area 52 in Nevada for comprehensive study. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have 12 hours to prepare them for transfer. The command center fell silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Sarah's thermal signature spiking with stress. 12 hours. Then Cross would pack 8,000 refugees into military transports and ship them to a facility that had been built to contain potential threats, not care for desperate survivors. Marcus touched Sarah's hand, deliberately pulled up the memory of her world dying. The images filled his mind with fire and loss and the desperate hope that had driven her people across light years to seek human compassion. He pulled back, looked at Cross with the same steady gaze he'd used on young soldiers who needed to understand why they were fighting. Admiral, I'd like to request something. Sarah, their queen, communicates through thermal contact. She can share memories, experiences. Let her show you what I've seen. Then make your decision. Cross's expression hardened. I don't negotiate with unknowns, Sergeant, and I don't compromise my objectivity by allowing potential mind manipulation. Marcus had expected that response. He'd served under Cross long enough to know she saw any deviation from protocol as weakness, but he'd also seen her make exceptions when presented with irrefutable evidence when the situation on the ground didn't match the intelligence from headquarters. He just needed to give her a reason to bend. Then let Colonel Graves try it. Marcus gestured at the man standing behind Cross, a lean officer in his 50s, with sharp eyes that tracked everything in the room like he was cataloging assets. Nathan Graves had risen fast through military intelligence, the kind of career trajectory that meant he was either brilliant or ruthless, probably both. If it's manipulation, he'll recognize it. If it's genuine communication, you'll have the intel you need to make an informed decision. Cross considered that for maybe 5 seconds, looked at Graves. Colonel Graves stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd survived a dozen Black Ops missions and came out looking like a hero. I'll volunteer, Admiral. If there's any indication of mental compromise, I'll report it immediately. Marcus guided Graves' hand to Sarah's palm, maintaining the three-way contact so he could monitor what information passed through. The thermal rush hit Graves hard. Marcus watched his pupils dilate, his breathing catch, his whole body go rigid as Sarah's memories flooded through him. The dying world, the exodus, the desperate hope. The same images Marcus had seen transmitted with the same emotional weight. But Marcus also felt something else through the connection. A spike of recognition in Graves that had nothing to do with empathy, a cold calculation, a measuring of value. When Graves pulled back, his expression showed shock and understanding, but underneath Marcus sensed something predatory, something wrong. Graves turned across and Marcus knew what was coming before the man opened his mouth. Admiral, it's sophisticated, more sophisticated than anything we've encountered. I saw propaganda, carefully constructed false memories designed to manipulate emotional responses. He looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity if it wasn't so calculating. Reed's been compromised. Classic Stockholm Syndrome. He's been in sustained contact with the alien for hours. His judgment can't be trusted. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. That's bullshit. I felt what you felt. Graves cut him off with a gesture that was pure command authority. Sergeant, your service record is exemplary, but you're a grandfather now. You should be retired, enjoying time with family. Instead, you've been under extreme stress, experiencing sustained exposure to unknown alien influence. The fact that you can't recognize the manipulation is proof it's working. Cross's expression shifted, and Marcus saw the decision forming before she spoke. She believed Graves, trusted his assessment over Marcus's protests because Graves was military intelligence and Marcus was a retired medic who'd violated orders. The math was simple, and the outcome was inevitable. Captain Torres, you have 12 hours to prepare the aliens for transfer. Graves post guards at all thermal chambers. No one enters or leaves without authorization. Reed. Cross paused, and for just a moment, something like regret flickered across her face. You're confined to quarters. I'm sorry, Sergeant, but I can't have you interfering with this operation. Two Marines moved forward to escort Marcus away. He didn't resist, didn't fight. 40 years of military training said you didn't assault fellow soldiers just because you disagreed with orders. But he caught Torres's eye as they led him toward the door, and something passed between them. An understanding, a shared recognition that sometimes following orders meant betraying everything you believed in. Torres gave the smallest nod. Received, understood. Whatever was going to happen next, she was with him. Marcus's quarters felt smaller than before the broken air conditioning, making the space oppressive, despite the heat he normally welcomed. The Marines had locked the door from the outside and posted a guard, probably with orders to stun him if he tried to leave. Standard procedure for securing potentially compromised personnel. He'd helped write some of those procedures back when he'd been teaching field medicine to new recruits. He sat on his bunk, thought about the ways good intentions led to terrible outcomes when people stopped asking whether their orders made sense. The door chime sounded. Marcus looked up, expecting another Marine come to check on him. Instead, Torres slipped through, moving fast and quiet, like someone who didn't want her presence recorded. She locked the door behind her and pulled a small device from her pocket, military-grade signal jammer that would make the next 10 minutes disappear from official records. We have maybe 8 minutes before someone notices the gap in surveillance. Torres's voice was low, urgent. I'm not surrendering those people to Area 52. Will's already working on an escape plan with Sarah. We split the station into 15 modules, use thermal cloaking to mask our heat signatures, scatter in different directions, and reconverge at a planet the Theron found. 3 weeks travel. Thoralis prime volcanic activity, thick atmosphere can support both our species. Marcus stood, military reflexes pushing through exhaustion. What do you need from me? Torres smiled, sharp and dangerous. I need you to do what you do best, keep people alive while everything goes to hell. She pulled up a schematic on her data pad, showed him the escape vectors Will had calculated. We're going to train crew in Theron on emergency evacuation procedures. You've got combat experience, field medicine, and you're the only person who can communicate directly with Sarah. I need you to make sure everyone knows their role when this goes sideways. The plan was insane. Breaking up a space station while thousands of people lived on it violated every safety protocol ever written. They'd be flying blind through space with minimal power, hunted by Earth's military gambling, everything on Sarah's navigational data about a planet none of them had ever seen. The failure rate was probably 80%, maybe higher. Marcus thought about Danny burning in that Bradley, thought about 40 years of regret, thought about 8,000 refugees who'd crossed light years because they believed humans would help. When do we move? Torres checked her chronometer. Graves will have discovered our preliminary work in about 4 hours. Cross's deadline is 12 hours. We launch in 3 before either of them can stop us. She left the way she'd come, silent and fast. The door locked behind her. Marcus was officially still confined to quarters, still officially compromised. But in 3 hours, none of that would matter. In 3 hours, they'd either be free or dead. He spent the next 2 hours mentally reviewing emergency procedures, thinking through contingencies, preparing for the 1,000 things that could go wrong when you tried to break up a space station and fly the pieces through hostile space. At the 2-hour mark, Will Carter appeared at his door with a maintenance override and a conspirator's grin. Captain says you're needed in engineering. Something about thermal systems failing? Very urgent. Definitely not a prison break. Will's tone made it clear that everything about this was exactly a prison break. The guard at Marcus's door bought the story because Will was chief engineer and thermal systems keeping 8,000 Theron alive definitely qualified as urgent. They made it to engineering without incident, where Torres had assembled 30 crew members and twice as many Theron in what was officially an emergency drill and unofficially a crash course in revolutionary action. Sarah stood at the front beside Torres, and the moment Marcus entered, she reached out with that gesture that meant connection. He took her hand, felt the thermal rush of gratitude and desperate hope, felt her sharing technical specifications with him faster than any verbal briefing could manage. She'd been working with Will for the past hour, teaching him thermal cloaking technology that could hide their heat signatures from military sensors. Not perfect, but good enough to make 15 scattered modules look like background radiation and navigation errors. Torres gestured everyone closer, kept her voice low, even though they jammed all surveillance in this section. In 90 minutes, we're going to do something that will either save 8,000 lives or get us all killed. Possibly both. Anyone who wants out, leave now, last chance. Nobody moved. Lieutenant Booker, who'd been ready to shoot Sarah 12 hours ago, stepped forward. Ma'am, I spent 20 years following orders without question. Watched good people die because commanders made decisions from offices thousands of miles away. I'm done with that. If we're doing this, I'm in. Marcus felt something shift in the room, a collective decision forming. These weren't soldiers following orders. They were people choosing to risk everything because it was right, because 8,000 refugees deserved better than cages and study, because sometimes the system was wrong and you had to break it to save lives. The next hour was controlled chaos. Will's engineering team installed thermal cloaking arrays throughout the station, working from specifications Sarah provided through Marcus's translation. They were cobbling together technology from 2 completely different species, making connections that shouldn't work, but somehow did, because desperation made engineers creative, and time pressure eliminated the luxury of doubt. Torres coordinated module assignments, making sure each of the 15 pieces would have enough crew to function and enough Theron to maintain thermal balance. She put Booker in charge of security protocols, Dr. Kim in charge of medical support, and Marcus in overall coordination, because he was the only one who could communicate instantly with Sarah, and through her with every Theron on the station. At the 90-minute mark, the alarm they'd been dreading went off. Not the station alarm, Graves's personal security alert triggered by surveillance footage showing unauthorized activity in damaged sections. Within 30 seconds, Cross's voice came through station-wide comms, cold and absolute. All personnel, this is Admiral Cross. We have detected sabotage and conspiracy to violate lawful orders. Security teams will secure all thermal chambers immediately. Captain Torres, you are under arrest for mutiny. Surrender now, and I'll recommend leniency. Resist, and I will use whatever force is necessary. Torres looked at Marcus, at Will, at the assembled crew, smiled like someone who'd just drawn a winning hand in a game everyone said was rigged. Well, I guess we're doing this the hard way. Well, how long until we can separate? Will checked his readouts, fingers flying across controls. 20 minutes if everything goes perfectly. 30 if we hit complications. 20 minutes to separate a station while Marines in combat armor hunted them through the corridors. 20 minutes to coordinate evacuation of 8,000 beings who'd never been through this kind of emergency. 20 minutes to pull off something that should take days of preparation and safety checks. Then I suggest everyone get to their positions. Torres pulled her sidearm, checked the charge. Marcus gets Sarah to Module 1. That's our command section. Booker delay crosses Marines as long as possible without starting a shooting war. We'll make it happen. The station erupted into motion. Crew members scattered to their assigned modules, helping Theran refugees understand what was about to happen through gestures and thermal contact, and the desperate improvisation that came from having no time and no better options. Marcus ran with Sarah toward Module 1, feeling her fear and determination through their constant contact, feeling 8,000 lives depending on decisions being made in real time by people who were mostly guessing. They were 50 meters from Module 1 when Colonel Graves stepped out of a side corridor with 4 Marines' weapons raised. Not the stunners that station security carried, full combat rifles with lethal ammunition. Graves had come prepared to kill if necessary. "That's far enough, Sergeant." Graves's voice carried none of the false sympathy from before. Just cold calculation. "The alien stays with me. You can walk away from this. Tell Admiral Cross you were coerced. Save yourself." Marcus positioned himself between Graves and Sarah's old combat instincts, flooding his system with adrenaline his body would regret later. "Can't do that, Colonel. She's under my protection." Graves sighed like this was disappointing but expected. "You're a good man, Reed, but you're fighting for the wrong side. That alien's technology is worth trillions. Thermal energy conversion, silicon-based biology, faster than light navigation. If Earth controls it, we become the dominant power in this sector. If we don't," he gestured with his rifle, the movement casual but deadly serious, "someone else will. China, Russia, private corporations, and they won't be gentle about it." Understanding crashed through Marcus like ice water. Graves hadn't been sent here just to secure the Theran. He'd been sent to acquire them, to take control of their technology and deliver it to whoever paid the most. Earth Command's orders were legitimate, but Graves had his own agenda running parallel. He wasn't following protocol, he was executing a heist disguised as military operation. "You lied to Cross." Marcus kept his voice level even though fury burned in his chest. "You told her the thermal contact was manipulation. But you felt the truth same as I did. You just saw dollar signs instead of dying people." Graves shrugged. "I saw opportunity. Same thing any smart person would see. Now step aside, Sergeant. Last warning." Marcus didn't move. Couldn't move. 40 years ago, he'd stood frozen while Danny burned because he'd waited for permission to act. He wouldn't make that mistake again. If Graves wanted Sarah, he'd have to go through Marcus first. The standoff lasted maybe 3 seconds before chaos erupted from an unexpected direction. Corinne, the Theran Royal Guard who'd pledged service to Marcus, appeared behind Graves's Marines with 15 Theran warriors. No weapons. Didn't need weapons. They moved with inhuman speed, touched armored suits, and superheated them from the outside. Marines screamed, bailed out of armor, cooking them alive, hit the deck in their undersuits, while Theran warriors stood over them with hands glowing cherry red from thermal discharge. Graves spun, tried to bring his rifle around. Marcus crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, used a wrist lock he'd learned in airborne hand-to-hand training, twisted the weapon away, and drove his elbow into Graves's solar plexus. The colonel went down, hard, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand, felt her shock, and gratitude felt Corinne's satisfaction at defending his guardian. "Run. Now." They made it to Module 1 with 30 seconds to spare. Will was at the controls, sweat running down his face, fingers dancing across systems that were screaming warnings about structural integrity and safety protocols. Torres stood at the command console, coordinating all 15 modules through a communication network that was more hope than actual technology. "Marcus, get strapped. In Sarah, I need you on thermal control. Keep our signature masked." Torres's voice cut through the chaos. "All modules, final check. Sound off." 14 voices came back over comms, crew chiefs confirming their sections were ready. Some sounded terrified. Some sounded excited. All of them sounded committed. Cross's voice overrode everything transmitted directly from her destroyer that was now in weapons range. Torres, this is your last chance. Stand down immediately or I will fire on your position. You have 30 seconds to comply. And Torres looked at Marcus, at Sarah, at Will with his hands on the separation controls, looked at the displays showing 8,000 Theron and 50 humans betting everything on a plan that defied every regulation ever written. Made her decision in the space between heartbeats. All modules execute separation. Now. Sentinel-7 shattered into 15 pieces with a sound like tearing metal and breaking promises. Explosive bolts fired in sequence, module connections severed, and suddenly Marcus was weightless as artificial gravity failed for 3 terrible seconds before emergency systems kicked in. Through the viewport, he watched the station he'd called home for 2 years break apart into scattered fragments, each piece accelerating on different vectors, thermal cloaking, making them shimmer and fade from sensors. Sarah collapsed in her seat, body going rigid as she channeled massive thermal energy into maintaining their cloak. Marcus felt her burning through reserves, pushing herself past safe limits. He grabbed her hand, fed his own body heat into the connection, shared the load in a way he didn't fully understand but felt necessary. Together, they held the thermal signature stable while Module 1 shot through space on a trajectory that would take them light years from Earth and everything familiar. Behind them, Cross's destroyer couldn't track all 15 targets at once, couldn't know which modules held the command crew, which held the most refugees, which were decoys, and which were essential. By the time her tactical team sorted through the chaos, the modules would be scattered across millions of kilometers of space, each one cloaked and silent and impossible to find. They'd escaped, but escape was only the beginning. Marcus hadn't left Sarah's side for 48 hours. The thermal bond required constant contact. Every time he pulled away for more than a minute, her body temperature dropped 2 degrees and that desperate vibration returned. So he stayed. Lay beside her under thermal blankets in the small medical bay of Module 1, feeding his body heat into her depleted reserves while she maintained the cloaking field that kept them invisible to Cross's pursuing destroyer. Kim brought food at irregular intervals, protein bars and water that Marcus ate one-handed while keeping his other palm pressed against Sarah's shoulder. Sleep came in fragments, dreams bleeding into waking until he couldn't quite tell which memories were his and which were leaking through the thermal connection. He saw Theron cities crystallizing in stellar fire, saw Danny burning in the Bradley, saw both with equal clarity, equal weight of guilt and loss. On the second day, Kim checked Sarah's vitals with equipment that was half medical scanner and half inspired guesswork. Her core temperature is stable at 38 Celsius, better than when we started, but she's burning through reserves faster than she can replenish them. If she keeps channeling energy into the cloaking field, Kim didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They both knew how it ended. Marcus felt the truth of it through their connection. Sarah was dying slowly, sacrificing herself to keep 8,000 people hidden from Earth's military. The same choice she'd made when she crashed her ship into Sentinel-7, one life for many. The mathematics of leadership that demanded some people burn so others could survive. Through the viewport, space looked empty and vast and unforgiving. No sign of Cross's destroyer, but that didn't mean much. Modern military sensors could track objects across millions of kilometers. The only thing keeping them alive was Sarah's cloaking technology and the fact that they'd scattered into 15 pieces that looked like navigation errors in stellar debris. Bora's voice came through the module's intercom, carrying a stress that made her words tight. Commander Torres' protector is adjusting course. New trajectory suggests they're tracking Module 3. Torres appeared in the medical bay doorway, still wearing the same uniform she'd had on when they separated the station. Dark circles under her eyes said she hadn't slept either. Can they confirm it's us? Not yet, but they're getting closer. If they get visual confirmation, Bora let the implication hang. Marcus touched Sarah's hand, felt her awareness rising from the semi-conscious state she'd been maintaining. Through the thermal connection, he felt her reaching out across space, sensing the heat signatures of the other modules, the cold pursuit of Protector's engines, the electromagnetic noise of active scanning. Her perception of the universe was entirely different from human senses. She experienced space as patterns of heat and cold life, as thermal signatures, danger as the absence of warmth. She showed him something through the connection, a memory, but not from her past, from now. A thermal signature aboard Protector that felt wrong. Discord, conflict, human emotional patterns that registered as fluctuating heat, and some of those patterns were spiking with doubt and guilt in the beginnings of rebellion. Marcus pulled back, looked at Torres. Some of Cross's crew are questioning the orders. Sarah can feel it, their thermal signatures show emotional conflict. If we can reach them, show them the truth. Torres' expression shifted from exhausted to calculating. Can she broadcast to them, like she did to you? Marcus relayed the question through thermal touch. Felt Sarah's response yes, but it would take massive energy. She was already burning herself up maintaining cloak. Adding a broadcast might kill her. The calculation was brutal: save herself and let Cross hunt them down, or sacrifice everything for one chance to change minds light years away. She chose sacrifice without hesitation. Queens didn't survive by being careful. Sarah sat up, body trembling with effort. Her three eyes focused on Marcus with intensity that transcended species, that spoke to something fundamental about beings who chose to lead. She placed both hands on his, creating full contact, and Marcus felt heat pouring from her core. Not gentle thermal transfers, this was controlled, burn a star going nova in miniature. Everything she had left channeled through him as amplifier. The pulse went out across space, riding electromagnetic frequencies that military sensors would dismiss as stellar noise. But to the humans aboard Protector, it hit like revelation. Marcus felt it through. Sarah felt the moment her shared memories crashed into 87 crew members who'd been following orders without questioning whether those orders made sense. Felt their shock as they experienced what he'd experienced: a world-dying, desperate flight hope placed in beings who might help or might destroy. Then he felt nothing. Sarah collapsed, thermal signature plummeting, body going limp. Kim was on her, immediately scanner screaming warnings that meant critical failure across multiple systems. She's shutting down core temperature 25 and dropping. Kim pulled emergency thermal packs from her kit, wrapped them around Sarah's torso. They barely registered against the cold radiating from her body. Marcus, I need you on full contact. Now. Marcus stripped off his shirt, pressed his bare chest against Sarah's back, wrapped his arms around her, and held on. Felt his own body heat draining into her like water into sand, never enough, always needing more. His core temperature dropped. Kim shouted warnings. He ignored them. If Sarah died, 8,000 refugees lost their navigator and their queen. If she died, the sacrifice was meaningless. He wouldn't let it be meaningless. Not again. Time became strange and fluid. Marcus floated in thermal connection that went deeper than conscious thought, experiencing Sarah's memories as if they were his own. Saw her coronation at age 23, too young and unprepared, but accepting the crown because her people needed stability. Saw her wedding to a scientist who studied stellar mechanics. Saw her son born under the light of a yellow star that would eventually kill them all. Saw her husband and child crystallize in the first wave of stellar expansion, their bodies turning to beautiful statues while she watched and couldn't save them. Understood then why she'd shut down emotionally after that, why she'd become cold and focused and willing to sacrifice anything, including herself. Not because she didn't feel, because she felt too much, and the only way to function was to freeze it all solid. Marcus knew that strategy, had used it himself for 40 years. Danny burning replayed in his mind every day, but he'd learned to watch it like security footage, distant and detached. If you felt every loss completely, you'd never function. You'd just curl up and die. But Sarah had stayed functional for 6 months, leading 8,000 survivors across light years, while her own grief tried to tear her apart from inside. She'd held it together through impossible choices and desperate gambles and the slow death of hope. She'd held it together until she found Marcus, and then she'd finally let herself believe that maybe they'd survive. Marcus talked to her even though she couldn't respond, even though he didn't know if she could hear. Told her about Danny, about Fallujah, about every mistake he'd made and every person he'd failed to save. Told her she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore, that he was here, that he'd hold her together until she could hold herself. Her thermal signature stopped dropping. Stabilized at 30 degrees. Not healthy, but no longer dying. Kim worked around them, monitoring vitals, adjusting thermal packs, doing everything possible to support what Marcus was doing through sheer, stubborn refusal to quit. Torres appeared in the doorway again, and this time her expression carried something Marcus hadn't seen before. Hope mixed with disbelief, the look of someone watching impossible things become real. It worked. Protector's crew mutinied. 12 junior officers locked Cross out of weapon systems and announced they won't fire on refugees. Torres's voice was hoarse. Cross is furious, but her hands are tied. She can't force compliance without starting a civil war on her own ship. Marcus felt the words through layers of exhaustion and thermal connection. Felt Sarah stir in his arms, consciousness returning like dawn after endless night. Her three eyes open, focused on him with recognition and gratitude, so profound it made his chest ache. You stayed. The words came not through thermal touch, but through some hybrid communication they developed over 48 hours of constant contact, part heat transfer, part learned understanding. You carried me. Marcus managed something like a smile. Told you I wouldn't lose another one. The celebration lasted maybe 10 minutes before Bora's voice cut through again, now carrying a different kind of urgency. Torres' new contact, assault shuttle fast approach from Protector's position. It's Colonel Graves. He's got 20 mercenaries with him and copied our trajectory for Theralis Prime. The module went silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Graves hadn't given up. He'd abandoned Cross, stolen a shuttle, and was racing ahead to the planet with enough firepower to capture Theran refugees and secure their technology for his own profit. He'd arrive 3 days before the modules established positions and be waiting when they landed. Torres pulled up tactical displays, ran calculations that all came out wrong. We can't outrun him. The modules aren't designed for speed. Sarah touched Marcus's hand, showed him something through the thermal link. A way to push the engines harder, burn hotter, risk everything to close the gap. They wouldn't beat Graves to the planet, but they could arrive hours behind instead of days. Hours might make the difference. She can do it. Marcus looked at Torres, but it'll burn her reserves. Maybe kill her. Sarah made that sound, the internal vibration that he'd learned to interpret as determination. Showed him through thermal touch that her life didn't matter if her people ended up in Graves's hands. The calculation was obvious. Torres looked at Sarah, really looked, seeing not an alien specimen, but a leader making impossible calculations about sacrifice and duty. Seeing something she recognized because she'd made those calculations herself when she decided to defy Earth Command. Do it. The next 60 hours were controlled burn. Sarah channeled thermal energy into the engines while Marcus stayed connected to her, feeding his own reserves into the system. Both of them existing in a state between conscious and unconscious, where only will kept them functional. The modules accelerated beyond safe limits, metal groaning under stress. Everyone aboard feeling the station shake and praying it held together. Kim monitored them both, forcing fluids and nutrients past lips that didn't want to swallow, keeping them alive through combinations of medicine and determination. Sophie appeared via video link from Module 3, her face tight with worry. Dad, your vitals are critical. You need to break contact and rest. Marcus couldn't quite focus on her face. Everything was thermal patterns, now heat and cold, and the desperate mathematics of energy transfer. We need just a few more hours. Sophie was crying. Marcus saw that through the thermal haze, recognized it as something he should care about, but couldn't quite process. His daughter, 35 years old, nurse in Dallas before all this. Smart enough to volunteer for the advanced module, brave enough to risk everything. She had Danny's courage without his bad luck. That was good. Marcus had given her something worth having. Dad, please, don't die out here. Not planning on it. The words came out slurred. Just keeping promises. The modules reached Theralis Prime 6 hours after Graves' shuttle. 6 hours that meant buildings would be burning and people would be imprisoned, but at least there was a chance to save them. 6 hours that meant Sophie's settlement was probably already under attack, but Marcus might reach her before Graves did whatever he planned. The landing was violent. Theralis' atmosphere was thick, turbulent, full of thermal updrafts from volcanic activity that tossed Module 1 around like paper in wind. Marcus regained enough consciousness to strap Sarah into her seat, to feel the bone-rattling descent, to watch through the viewport as ground rushed up too fast and wrong. They hit hard. Emergency systems screamed. Something in the rear compartment exploded with a sound that meant critical systems failure. The module skidded across volcanic rock, tilted, stopped. Silence except for alarms and the sound of people groaning. Marcus unstrapped, helped Sarah up. Torres was already at the hatch, forcing it open manually because power was compromised. Outside, Thorilus Prime looked like hell reimagined as paradise volcanic peaks, spewing lava into thick orange sky jungle vegetation that shouldn't exist, growing in the heat, and in the distance, black smoke rising from what had been Module 3, Sophie's module. Marcus grabbed a rifle from emergency stores, checked the charge out of reflexes older than rational thought. Looked at Torres. "I'm going after her." Torres didn't argue. Just tossed him a tactical vest and ammunition. "Booker, Corin, go with him. The rest of us secure this position and prepare for Graves' eventual arrival here." The trek to Module 3 took 2 hours through terrain that wanted to kill them. Jungle that grew in 50-degree heat, predators that hunted thermal signatures, volcanic vents that erupted without warning. Marcus pushed through it all on autopilot combat experience from wars 4 decades past, guiding him through threat assessment and tactical movement. Pyroclaws found them a kilometer from the module. 8-foot predators with silicon-based armor and hunting patterns that suggested pack intelligence. 12 of them circled, moving with coordinated precision that meant this wasn't random. They'd identified Marcus's group as prey and were executing strategy. Booker opened fire. Bullets sparked off armor, did nothing. They're armored like tanks. Marcus's combat brain supplied information from muscle memory. Tanks had weak points, joints, eyes anywhere the armor couldn't fully cover. "Aim for joints, expose flesh." Sarah stepped forward, hands glowing with building thermal charge. She created decoys, phantom heat signatures, that pulled half the pack away, chasing nothing. Corin and his Theran warriors rushed the remaining pyroclaws, touching armor and superheating it until the creatures fled from pain they didn't understand. They reached the ridge overlooking Module 3's settlement, just as the sun, 3 suns actually making Thorilus' day, a constant bright twilight, showed the full scope of Graves' assault. 20 mercenaries in military exoskeletons, weapons that belonged on battlefields, not rescue operations. Buildings burned. Theran refugees huddled in cages designed for prisoners. And at the center, being dragged from the medical tent by 2 mercenaries, was Sophie. Marcus felt something go cold and focused in his chest. The same feeling he'd had in Fallujah when insurgents had pinned down his unit and someone needed to do something impossible. The feeling that said calculation was over, that only action mattered now. "Booker, you are Alpha Team sniper position on that ridge. Corin, Beta Team thermal assault from the east. I'm Charlie, direct extraction." He checked his rifle, confirmed ammunition. "Wait for my signals and hit them fast and hard. We don't stop until Sophie's safe." Booker looked at him with something like awe. "Sir, you're a retired medic planning an assault on 20 professionals." Marcus's smile was cold and dangerous. "Lieutenant, I'm a medic who's got nothing to lose except people I care about. Now get in position." The assault happened in 3 phases. Sarah created a thermal illusion that made the settlement look like it was under pyroclaw attack. Mercenaries turned outward defensive, and Booker's team put 6 of them down with precision fire before they understood the threat was human. Corin's Theran warriors rushed the perimeter, touching exoskeleton armor and superheating it until mercenaries bailed out screaming. Marcus went straight through the middle, used cover and movement patterns from Fallujah urban combat, closed distance before mercenaries could adjust their fire. 2 of them tried to stop him. He used the rifle as a club on the first, drove a knee into the second's groin, and followed with an elbow to the throat. His body protested, but muscle memory lasted forever, and desperation made him faster than he had any right to be. Reached Sophie as mercenaries dragged her toward Graves' shuttle, cut her restraints with a knife from his tactical vest. "You okay?" Sophie stared at him like he'd appeared from thin air. "Dad, what are you? How did you? Saving you. Again. Move." They fought their way back through chaos that was half combat and half disaster. Mercenaries scattered, trying to regroup. Theran warriors pursued them with thermal attacks. Pyroclaws, drawn by the noise and heat, entered the settlement from 3 sides and attacked everyone indiscriminately. Marcus kept Sophie behind him, rifle up, scanning for threats that came from too many directions. Graves' voice cut through the combat on external speakers. "Reed, you're good, I'll give you that, but I'm calling in reinforcements. 100 mercenaries, ETA 48 hours. Try stopping that." His shuttle lifted off with Sarah still in the cargo bay. Marcus watched it arc toward the volcanic caldera 20 kilometers north toward the fortified position Graves had established. Felt cold calculation replaced hot combat instinct. 100 mercenaries meant they couldn't win through force. Meant they needed to change the battlefield, use the terrain, make Graves' strength into weakness. The volcano. Graves had chosen the caldera because it was defensible, but it was also a death trap if the mountain decided to erupt. And according to Theron geological data, this volcano was overdue. Torres received his plan with the look of someone trying to decide if Marcus was brilliant or insane. Probably both. You want to trigger a volcanic eruption. I want to give Graves a choice. Leave voluntarily or die in fire. Binary decision. They spent the next 30 hours preparing. Will and his engineers identified the weak points in the volcanic chamber's western wall, placed charges that would destabilize the magma flow if detonated in sequence, calculated blast radius escape routes timing down to the second, evacuated all 15 module settlements to safe zones 10 kilometers from the caldera. The mercenary ships arrived on schedule. Marcus watched them land in the caldera, 100 soldiers in combat gear deploying like this was an invasion. Graves probably told them they were securing dangerous aliens, probably promised them bonuses and promotions. Definitely didn't mention they were walking into a trap designed by a retired medic who'd spent 40 years learning that sometimes the only way to win was to change what winning meant. Marcus infiltrated the base alone, used thermal camouflage suit that Sarah had designed through Kim before Graves took her, moved through the caldera during shift change when security was transitional and people paid less attention. Found Sarah in a detention cell body temperature, dropping Graves' equipment, extracting thermal energies for analysis and profit. 2 guards. Marcus took them down with techniques from ranger training chokeholds that didn't require strength, just leverage and knowledge. Freed Sarah, gave her a thermal pack. Can you move? She stood on legs that shook but held. With you, always. They ran. Graves' alarm systems caught them 50 meters from the exit. Lockdown protocols engaged. 100 mercenaries converged on their position. Marcus triggered his comm. Will now. The charges detonated in perfect sequence. Western wall of the magma chamber cracked, then shattered. Lava erupted upward, pyroclastic flow spreading across the caldera floor at 700 degrees Celsius. Mercenaries scattered trying to reach their ships. Metal melted. Shields failed. Graves' voice screamed through external speakers, furious and terrified. Marcus and Sarah reached the escape tunnel, the route Will had mapped through old lava tubes. Behind them, the caldera became an inferno. Ahead, the tunnel exit collapsed from seismic activity. Lava chased them from behind, trapped between fire and stone. Marcus's hands were bleeding, nails, torn fingers burned. The gap in the collapsed tunnel was 6 inches wide, not enough. Behind them, lava roared, heat so intense that the air itself was burning. 30 seconds, maybe less. Sarah collapsed against the rock face, her body temperature spiking dangerously as she poured everything into thermal manipulation. Too hot. She was burning herself up from inside. Leave me. Her voice came through thermal contact, weak and fading. You can fit. I cannot. Marcus grabbed her face with burned hands, forced her to meet his eyes. We've been through this. I don't leave people. Not anymore. Not ever. He wedged the pry bar deeper, threw his weight against it with strength that shouldn't have been in a body his age. Something in his shoulder tore. He felt it pop, felt the spike of pain kept pulling. The gap widened to 8 inches. 10, 12. Now move. He shoved Sarah through first, her body scraping rock, leaving skin behind. Then himself twisting sideways, feeling stone tear his back open. The tunnel ceiling collapsed behind him, lava filling the space where they'd been standing 3 seconds before. They rolled onto open ground, lungs, burning bodies, broken but alive. The volcano erupted massively behind them, pyroclastic flow, consuming everything in the caldera. Graves and his mercenaries, their ships, their equipment, all of it buried under tons of molten rock and ash. Marcus and Sarah lay on volcanic soil, staring up at 3 alien suns, both of them too exhausted to move. Somewhere in the distance, people were shouting, searching for them. But for now, there was just this moment. Surviving when they shouldn't have. Keeping promises when it should have been impossible. Marcus thought about Danny, about the Bradley, about 40 years of carrying guilt. Thought about how sometimes you don't get to save everyone. Sometimes you just do your best and hope it's enough. This time it was enough. They found them 500 meters from the eruption zone. Sophie led the rescue team, and when she saw Marcus, she dropped to her knees beside him and cried the way you cry when you thought someone was dead and they're not. "You stupid old man," she said through tears. "You blew up a volcano." Marcus tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Recovery took 3 days. Dr. Kim worked miracles with limited resources, treating burns and smoke inhalation, and the kind of trauma that came from pushing bodies past their breaking points. Sarah's thermal healing abilities helped. She shared the technique with Kim, showing her how to use controlled heat to accelerate cellular repair. Human and Theran medicine working together to save lives from both species. When Marcus could finally stand without help, he found Sarah at the memorial they'd built for the 16 elders who'd chosen the long sleep. The crystallized statue stood in a circle, catching light from 3 suns and refracting it into patterns that looked like dancing fire. "Your challenge coin is gone," Sarah said without turning. "Someone took it." "I know, I saw." Marcus moved to stand beside her. "Some kid from Module 7. Jake. He asked if he could have it, said he wanted to remember what sacrifice meant." He smiled. "Seemed like Danny would approve." Sarah touched his hand. "Not thermal communication, just contact. You have let him rest." "Working on it." Marcus looked at the memorial at the settlement being built around it. "Still got work to do first." 6 months after the volcano Chung settlement was thriving. A hybrid city of human and Theran architecture, using the best of both species engineering. School where children learned together. Medical center where Sophie taught Theran biology to human doctors and Theran healers taught thermal medicine to humans. Farms using geothermal energy and alien growing techniques. A community that shouldn't have worked but did because necessity made people creative and shared survival made enemies into allies. Admiral Cross arrived with Earth's delegation on a Tuesday. She came with diplomats, not Marines. Came with proposals for trade agreements and technology exchange, not demands for surrender. Public opinion on Earth had shifted. The mutiny on Protector had become a cause. The footage of Theran children being saved had gone viral, and governments that wanted re-election couldn't ignore millions of people saying help them. Cross found Marcus at the training facility watching 20 students practice emergency medical procedures. 10 humans, 10 Theran, working in mixed pairs, learning to treat injuries from both species. "Master Sergeant Reed," Cross's voice had lost some of its edge. "Or should I say Guardian Reed?" Marcus gestured at the students. "Just Marcus is fine, Admiral. Can I help you?" "I came to apologize." The words came out stiff, like they weren't used to being said. "I spent 30 years following orders without questioning them. Good orders, bad orders, didn't matter. Orders were orders." She looked at the memorial wall visible through the window. "You taught me that sometimes following orders means betraying everything you believe in. That was a hard lesson." Still learning it myself. Marcus watched one of his students, a Theran teenager, successfully treat a simulated burn on her human partner. Every day. Cross was quiet for a moment. "Earth wants formal relations with the Theran, technology exchange, defense alliance, but as partners, not subjects. Sarah agrees, but she wants proof of good faith first." "Smart," Marcus smiled. "What kind of proof?" 50 families, teachers, farmers, engineers, coming here to live and work alongside the Theran, including," Cross paused, "including my granddaughter. She's a teacher. Volunteered immediately when she heard about this place." Marcus looked at Cross with new understanding. "That's a hell of a gesture, Admiral. It's the right thing to do." Cross held out her hand. "I won't ask you to forgive me for what I almost did, but I wanted you to know that I learned from it." Marcus shook her hand. "That's all any of us can do. Learn and try to do better next time." The ceremony happened 2 weeks later. Chung held a gathering in the Central Plaza. Humans and Theran together to honor what Torres called the Bridge Builders. Marcus stood with Sarah Torres, Will Kim Booker, and the others who'd risked everything to save 8,000 refugees. Sarah spoke first, Marcus translating her thermal communication into words. "We came to Earth's space dying and desperate. We hoped humans would help, but we did not know if the stories we had heard were true. Marcus Reed showed us they were true. He chose compassion when orders demanded cruelty. He chose to act when others waited for permission. He taught us that humanity's greatest strength is not your weapons or your technology. It is your willingness to help strangers, to sacrifice for others, to build instead of destroy. She turned to Marcus, held out a blade forged from thermal energy and cooled volcanic glass. Guardian's flame. Only three exist among my people. You are the first human to bear one. Marcus accepted the blade, felt its weight, understood what it represented. I'm just a medic who got lucky. Corinne, standing with the Theron warriors, made a sound that was almost a laugh. Guardian, you are proof that one person can change the fate of worlds. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself at the training facility again. It was becoming a habit. The next generation needed teaching, and teaching gave him purpose. One of his students, that kid Jake, who'd taken Danny's challenge coin, raised his hand. Guardian Reed, what's the most important thing you learned out of everything? Marcus set down the medical kit he'd been demonstrating, looked at the 20 faces watching him, human and Theron, both waiting for wisdom from someone who'd supposedly figured things out. That it's never too late. The words came easier than expected. I was 68 when I met Sarah. I was a maintenance tech living in a hot room on a space station, counting days until retirement or death, whichever came first. I thought my life was over. Thought the best parts were 40 years behind me, buried in Iraqi sand, with people I couldn't save. He looked out the window at Chung Settlement, at the memorial, where he'd left Danny's coin for the next generation to carry. I was wrong. My real mission was just beginning. Everything before the wars, the failures, the guilt, all of it was preparation for this. For you. A young Theron warrior made the questioning vibration. Marcus had learned to interpret it without thermal contact. What is our mission, Guardian? To be better than we were. Marcus gestured at the mixed group. You're the first generation that won't see each other as alien. You'll just see people. Different kinds of people, but people. When your moment comes, and it will come because moments always come, you won't hesitate. You'll know what to do because you've trained for it, because you've learned from our mistakes, Jake spoke up again. But what if we fail? What if we make the wrong choice? Marcus thought about Danny, about the Bradley, about 40 years of replaying that moment and wishing he could change it. Then you learn from it, you carry it, and you make sure the next choice is better. He looked each student in the eye. The only real failure is stopping, giving up, deciding that because you failed once, you'll fail forever. The class continued. Marcus taught. The students learned. Outside, three suns set over Chung Settlement, painting the sky in colors Earth had never seen. Children played in the plaza. Human and Theron mixed so completely that telling who was who required actually looking. Ships from Earth arrived weekly now, bringing families and teachers and people willing to build something new. That night, Sarah found Marcus on the observation deck, looking at stars that were alien to both their species. She touched his hand, not thermal communication, just contact. Comfort that transcended species and language. You have become what your species calls a teacher. Marcus nodded. Trying to. Don't know if I'm any good at it. You are guardian. You guard not just with weapons, but with wisdom. Her three eyes fixed on him with that intensity that still made his chest tight. Danny Cole would be proud of who you became. Marcus thought about that. About the kid he'd been in Desert Storm, about the guilt-ridden medic in Fallujah, about the maintenance tech who'd woken up with an alien queen dying on top of him, about the man he'd become through desperation and necessity and the simple refusal to let another person die when he could save them. Maybe, he said quietly, maybe he would. Somewhere below, a student laughed. Human or Theron, he couldn't tell from the sound. Didn't matter. They were all just kids learning how to survive in a universe that was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. Marcus Reed was 70 now, retired combat medic, former maintenance tech, guardian of two civilizations, teacher to the generation that would inherit everything he and Sarah and Torres and all the others had built. His real life had started at 68. He wondered what the next decade would bring. Come on, Sarah said, pulling gently at his hand. Torres is making what she calls barbecue. I do not understand this human custom, but she insists we attend. Marcus smiled, let himself be led toward whatever came next. Behind them, stars turned. Ahead, people waited. And for the first time in 40 years, the future looked like something worth living for. At the memorial wall, where 16 crystallized elders stood in their circle, a new generation played. Jake wore Danny's challenge coin around his neck, teaching a young Theron about the 82nd Airborne and what sacrifice meant. The past and future meeting, learning from each other, building something neither species could have built alone. Marcus Reed had spent 40 years carrying the dead. Now he could finally let them rest. The living needed him, and he was ready to answer that call. Not because he'd stopped failing, he'd never stopped making mistakes, never stopped second-guessing his choices, but because he'd learned that the only way to honor the dead was to keep saving the living, to keep teaching the next generation, to keep building bridges between people who thought they had nothing in common. Danny had died in fire because Marcus hesitated. Sarah had almost died in cold because the universe was cruel. But 8,000 Theron refugees lived because one maintenance technician decided that orders were less important than lives, that protocol was less important than compassion, that sometimes you had to break everything to save anything. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was enough. The stars turned. The settlement grew. And Marcus Reed, 70 years old and still learning, still growing, still becoming something more than he'd been yesterday, walked toward the sound of laughter and the smell of Torres's questionable barbecue and the warmth of people who'd become family through choice rather than blood. Behind him, the memorial stood silent, elders crystallized in peace, a challenge coin worn by the next generation. Empty spaces, waiting for new names, new stories, new sacrifices that would come because they always came. But tonight there was just this three suns setting on a world that had almost seen genocide but instead saw hope. Two species learning to build together. One old soldier finally understanding that his war was over and his real work was just beginning. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.